Anna Johnson stood by the window, holding an almost cold cup of coffee. The mug bore the inscription, "The best day starts with coffee," but to her it seemed more like a mockery. Ever since she turned 40, the days had lost their color. Household chores, the occasional odd jobs from home, plus endless lines at the supermarket. She felt as though she were living someone else's life, not her own. She tried not to remember the times when everything seemed possible, when she took painting courses and planned to open a small gallery in their suburban area. And once, she had enthusiastically dreamed of the future with Daniel, her husband. But now every time she looked at him, she saw a tired man, constantly occupied with his work. Over the years, their conversations had become short and routine. "How was your day? What's for dinner? Where should I put the bills?" And Anna realized that these exchanges had long since been stripped of the warmth that used to make her heart beat faster. She heard the click of a car door in the yard. Glancing out onto the street, Anna noticed the familiar figure of the mailman. Light gray hair, tall, slightly stooped back, neatly pressed uniform. His name was James McRoy. He slowly approached their mailbox, habitually pulling out letters and invoices from his bag. Anna shifted her gaze to the kitchen table, piled with advertising leaflets and an unpaid electricity bill. She wasn't expecting anything special. What difference did it make what they'd bring again today? But something nonetheless prodded her to go outside. Maybe she just wanted some kind of change, even a small one. When Anna cracked open the door, James had already raised his head, noticing her. A usual smile appeared on the mailman's face, not bright and forced, but rather calm and warm. That same smile that seemed to confirm there were people in the world ready to ask, "How are you?" Not out of politeness, but genuinely. "Good morning, Mrs. Johnson," he said quietly, nodding. "Brought you something to read, although it's mostly bank ads." Anna nodded, taking the stack of letters. An inexplicable feeling arose within her, a mix of gratitude and sadness. She herself couldn't understand why she was reacting this way to an ordinary mailman. "Thank you, James." She hesitated, not knowing what else to say. "How are you?" "Me?" He shrugged slightly. "Nothing special. There was a beautiful sunrise this morning, and the birds were singing in the neighbor's flower bed. Let's see what the day brings." These words, incredibly simple and mundane, suddenly made Anna feel a pang of envy. When was the last time she noticed a sunrise or birds singing? All her attention went to dealing with everyday matters. When Daniel left for the office, she hurriedly packed his lunchbox, went over her shopping list, and seemed to have completely forgotten about the beauty around her. "A beautiful sunrise, you say?" she repeated quietly. "Yes," James confirmed. "For me, it's the best time of day, when the air is still cool and the sky shifts its shades from lilac to pink." Anna nodded, clutching the stack of letters, and felt something tighten inside her out of pity for herself. She too wanted to look at the sky that way, to see in it something more than a signal that she had to hang out the laundry before the sun got too hot. "And how are you, Mrs. Johnson?" the mailman asked with a slight smile. "You looked a bit preoccupied today when I walked up." She was taken aback. No one had asked how she was for a long time, and certainly no one had spoken with such concern in their voice. Even Daniel, it seemed, had lost the habit of noticing changes in her mood. "I'm fine," she quickly put on a smile. "Probably just slept too little." James held his gaze a moment longer than a stranger normally would. Anna felt that he could see right through her, but he didn't pry, apparently understanding everyone has secrets you can't express in a minute. He just nodded and stepped back. "If you ever need something from the post office or just any help, don't hesitate to say so," he said and added quietly. "Sometimes to feel better, it's enough for someone to truly ask how you are." Those words resonated strangely in Anna's chest. She lowered her eyes and mumbled, "Thank you," in reply. When James turned and walked on to the next house, she suddenly wanted to call after him, something like, "Wait, tell me more about the sunrise." But she kept silent. It was easier to remain within the usual boundaries. That evening, when Daniel returned from work, Anna inconspicuously watched him, hoping he would notice her condition. But he merely muttered "hi" and sat down with his laptop, reviewing work reports. Anna tried to start talking about how she felt some kind of emptiness today, but his lack of attention said it all. He just mm-hummed in response and kept typing away. She remembered James's warm, vivid glance, and a sudden sadness overwhelmed her. At night, she had strange dreams, a mix of old memories, how she once worked on her paintings in an art group, how she was so happy, anticipating a future with Daniel. Then she saw James. He stood and looked at her with that same piercing gaze, as if to say, "I see you, and you're not alone." Anna woke up with her heart pounding, sensing that these dreams were a sign of some kind of change. The next morning, she set the empty cup on the table and looked out the window. Normally, she wouldn't go out specifically, but today she felt a weird excitement. What if James was already on his way? She threw on a light cardigan and stepped onto the porch, wondering if it was improper to catch the mailman right at the mailbox. However, James wasn't there. Maybe she was early. Anna smirked at herself, feeling like a teenager waiting for a friend on the way to school. But within 15 minutes, the mail truck appeared. It stopped not as close as usual, maybe at the next house, and Anna's heart froze. She realized she really didn't understand why she was doing this. Why was she waiting for his glance? She mentally scolded herself for overthinking. "He's just a mailman, right?" James walked up to her yard and smiled. Anna pretended she was simply taking in the morning air, but she felt the tension rising inside. He greeted her, handed over a bundle of letters, bills for electricity, gas, some supermarket ads. The usual set, "Today they're predicting a good day," he said, raising an eyebrow mischievously. "Maybe you should take a walk after lunch. The weather's supposed to be great." "Yes, maybe," Anna muttered, clearly realizing she hadn't gone for a walk in months. "Thanks for the tip." He smiled. That simple gesture made her feel a little warmer. And to her surprise, instead of the usual, "Thanks, have a good day," she said. "And do you always notice such little things? Sunrises, the weather, people's moods?" James shrugged. "I've been delivering mail on these streets for many years. I figured out one simple truth. If you don't look at the details, the day becomes just routine. And he smirked, "I like life too much just to run around with a mailbag." For some reason, that answer touched Anna deeply. He seemed an example of how a person can be happy with small joys. And when had she last been happy simply about the sun or birdsong? "Thank you," she repeated for the second time in the last 5 minutes. He nodded and walked on, and she, unexpectedly for herself, remained on the porch, watching his figure recede along the street. A light breeze brushed her hair, and Anna felt her fingers tighten around the bundle of letters. A wave of warmth suddenly passed across her cheeks. Maybe it was the sign of an awakening feeling that had yet no name. Inside the house, she returned to her usual chores, washing dishes, wiping the kitchen table, noting in her to-do list that she had to buy groceries for dinner. But somewhere deep in her mind, a quiet voice sounded. "You can still change something in your life. It's not too late." And that voice wouldn't let up, even though she tried to focus on cooking. That evening, Anna tried to tell her husband about a pleasant acquaintance, casually mentioning that the mailman turned out to be a very attentive guy. But Daniel only heard mailman and brushed it off. "I hope he brought at least some normal mail and not just bills." It seemed he didn't notice her tone or her desire to share something truly alive. When Anna went to bed, she heard the muffled hum of the washing machine and felt she couldn't bear another such night filled with emptiness. Suddenly, she had a wild desire to live a single day, not by the schedule, not in utter boredom. And for the first time in a long while, she felt a sense that this mailman, James, he was a person who saw in her not merely Daniel's wife or the woman who stays home. He looked at her as though he noticed a living person with emotions and dreams. At that moment, Anna realized that the routine that had seemed eternal was beginning to crack. A ray of light had appeared, whispering, "There is life beyond the ordinary, and perhaps you still have the right to happiness." She clenched her fists under the blanket and closed her eyes. In the days ahead, James would bring the mail every time, and among the pile of bills and brochures, there might be something more that could shake her and everything she believed in. Anna was still under the impression of the conversation with the mailman, as though something in her had awakened. The morning chores proceeded as usual. She brewed coffee, turned on the dishwasher, and swept the living room. But every supposedly routine detail took on a new shade. Now, opening the door to let in the morning light, she caught herself looking into the distance for that familiar figure. She hated to admit it, but her heart froze each time with anticipation. What if he doesn't come today? Or he comes but doesn't smile at her the way he usually does? She tried to distract herself by doing laundry, but her thoughts stubbornly returned to James, a mix of guilt and curiosity. She was already married, and though her relationship with her husband had dried up in terms of emotion, it was still marriage. And yet here was this almost stranger in whom Anna saw more warmth than she'd felt in all the recent months of living with Daniel. But was that fair? Or was she just looking for salvation in the first person who paid her attention? She had just poured her second cup of coffee when she heard the familiar squeak of brakes. The mail truck had stopped. Anna's heart fluttered. She gripped the cup so tightly that she almost spilled the drink. "What am I doing?" she thought. "Why am I reacting this way?" But the next moment, without answering her own questions, she hurried to the door. James, as before, walked up to the mailbox, placed some letters inside, and then noticed Anna on the porch. A calm, friendly smile appeared on his face, the smile of someone who's happy to see a familiar acquaintance. "Good morning," he said, slightly raising a bundle of envelopes. "Today we've got registered mail and some ads. Not sure there's anything too interesting." Anna noticed that this time he looked more relaxed. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, and there was slightly more gray at his temples than she remembered, as if small details were becoming clearer. She smiled back, a smile she hadn't recognized on herself for a long time, sincere and warm. "Good morning. Maybe you'd like to come in for a minute. I have coffee. If you have time, of course." She spoke, and inside everything clenched with fear that he'd refuse or, conversely, misunderstand. But James didn't look surprised. It seemed he too wanted to suggest something like this. He studied her carefully, as if trying to read her intentions. "If you truly don't mind," he replied, "I'd love a cup. It's a tough route today." Anna nodded and moved aside, letting him into the house. Probably for the first time in many years, she was inviting a stranger inside. But for some reason, she felt it was the right thing to do. Inside, the house was in its usual cozy disarray, a blanket on the couch, magazines on the coffee table, flowers that had long needed replanting, yet the place felt warm. James followed her to the kitchen, and Anna noticed how he carefully looked around, not judging, just curious. "Sorry about," she began, pointing to the not-so-tidily folded towels and an old newspaper on the table. "It's very nice here," James interrupted. "Much cozier than my apartment, honestly." Anna smiled, feeling a sort of icy knot inside her melt. Maybe she needed to hear that her house wasn't just a place of obligatory chores, but a warm space she created. She poured coffee into 2 mugs, setting one before him. James nodded in thanks, took a sip, and closed his eyes as if savoring the aroma. "Thank you," he said quietly. "It's exactly what I needed after rushing around all day." There was genuine sincerity in his voice, something Anna hadn't heard in a long time. She sat down opposite him, hugging her own mug with both hands. For a few seconds they were silent, but it wasn't awkward, it was a comforting stillness. "Have you worked as a mailman for a long time?" Anna asked to break the silence. James smirked. "About 10 years now. I served in the army before, then divorced, had to start over. The postal service seemed like a solid place. There's a clear job and stability. Plus," he raised an eyebrow, "you learn little stories about people every day, if only indirectly, through letters and short chats." Anna nodded, feeling how much she wanted to listen, to ask, to learn more. No one spoke to her like this. Her husband usually brushed off her attempts at conversation with a dismissive, yeah, interesting." But here was someone ready to share his life. "You mentioned a divorce," she quietly said. "Was that? Why?" James did not avert his gaze, and Anna thought he might clam up, but he exhaled shortly. "You know, it happens when 2 people just grow apart. We tried, but nothing worked out, and then too many resentments built up. Now she has her own life. And me, I work, meet new people. He smiled a little. Like you. That phrase made Anna's cheeks flush. She realized there was a spark of mutual understanding between them. It seemed his problems mirrored her own, except she was still married. That fact made her heart tighten from the contradictions. Suddenly the phone rang. Anna automatically picked it up from the table, saw that Daniel was calling. She felt a pang of panic, as if caught doing something forbidden. "Hello," she answered quietly, getting up from the table and stepping a few feet away. "Yes, I'm home. No, nothing special. Lunch? I... Of course I'll cook." James, not wanting to eavesdrop, slowly took another sip of coffee, looking away to show he wasn't intruding. But Anna felt his tension too. Ending the brief call, she put the phone down and returned, trying not to meet the mailman's eyes. "Husband," he guessed. "Yes," she nodded curtly. "He asked me to cook something for dinner." Anna sighed, attempting to shake off the awkwardness. "I'm sorry. I guess I should start cooking now." She rose, demonstrating that while she didn't want to kick him out, she also couldn't linger in this situation for too long. James understood without further explanation. He stood smiling. "Thanks for the coffee. If you need anything, happy to help," he said. Anna walked him to the door. When he stepped outside, she noticed how he turned, as if wanting to add something, but changed his mind. In that fraction of a second, her heart skipped a beat again. She nearly said, "Stay just a little longer," but feared her own boldness. Once the door closed behind him, Anna heard the motor of the mail truck start up and drive away. She went back to the kitchen, absent-mindedly poured out the remaining coffee, and realized she hadn't even tasted hers. Her mind was racing. What am I doing? I'm married. I have a husband I've lived with for so many years. Then again, a different inner voice echoed, "You haven't done anything bad. You just talked to someone who noticed how tired you are. Is that a crime?" During the day, she tried to return to her routine, washing dishes, sorting clothes. But each time she heard the slightest noise outside, she tensed, half expecting him to appear again. The idea that the mailman could help her, even just by talking or offering a sense of understanding, seemed both thrilling and frightening. That evening, Daniel came home a bit earlier. Anna prepared pasta, trying to act as usual. He kissed her on the cheek, asked about trivial household matters. She found herself listening but not hearing. Her thoughts lay elsewhere. What if James was right and I can ask for help? What if he really understands me better than my own husband? For a few minutes, Anna tried to mention her struggles, her loneliness, but Daniel appeared wrapped up in his phone, reading some work article. Seeing him like that, Anna felt the same bitterness. I tried, right? That night, she couldn't fall asleep quickly. Her mind swirled with thoughts of James's words about, if it hurts for years, it's time to change something. She understood she couldn't keep living this way, but was frightened of stepping into the unknown. In her ears whispered a soft voice, "Just be honest with yourself." Anna knew that morning would sort everything out, or conversely, complicate the tangled knot of doubts and feelings. She fell asleep by dawn, for the first time in a long while smiling, because her life had gained some light, something she dreaded but desperately wanted to keep. Morning began as usual. Anna put the kettle on, mechanically sifting through her thoughts, trying to spill them into a to-do list. But after that last conversation with James, contradictions blossomed within her. She realized she was on the verge of something massive. On one hand, fear and guilt. On the other, the strange joy of communicating with someone who sees her and listens. Daniel left early, not even drinking coffee, citing an urgent appointment. Anna felt the usual pang of guilt. Yes, she had distanced herself, but he never tried to break down the wall of estrangement either. She wanted to call him and say, "Let's talk, it hurts me." But pride and exhaustion stopped her. In the yard, flowers began to bloom, small yellow buds in the flower bed near the mailbox. Anna noticed she was staring at them longer than usual, as though these tiny shoots symbolized change. Then she heard footsteps at the gate. Her heart began to pound. Is it him? James walked through the gate, appearing somewhat fatigued, as if the morning dew had soaked his shoes. He gave her a subdued smile, as if himself afraid of crossing boundaries. "Hi, Anna. Sorry for coming again without notice. His voice was quiet, almost apologetic. I brought something that got held up at the office. Anna nodded, feeling that same strange warmth spreading inside. Sure, come in. They went into the house. She led him to the kitchen, and he silently handed her the envelopes. Anna mechanically flipped through them, finding nothing special. Yet she still felt grateful for any chance to talk. You look tired, she remarked, noticing his tense face. Didn't sleep well, he admitted. Too many thoughts. Anna felt how his short answer resonated with her own state. She too couldn't get restful sleep. Too many swirling anxieties. An empty house, locked doors, her knocking but no one opening. Maybe you should sit. I'll make some tea, she offered, striving to sound calm though she was trembling inside. James gave a faint smile and sat at the table. Anna saw something fleeting in his eyes. Doubt or resolve. His hands trembled slightly as he locked his fingers, trying to quell his nerves. She realized he too was on the edge, just like her. While the water boiled, they stayed silent. But now the silence felt no longer awkward. Anna heard the pitter-patter of rain outside and the thudding of her heart as she placed a cup in front of him. Thanks, he whispered, cupping the mug. Care to tell me what's bothering you? Anna asked, expecting he might not answer. Maybe I'm just afraid of overstepping, he replied. Ever since we started talking more, I keep thinking if this is right. You have a family, a husband. I don't want to cause trouble. He lifted his gaze, filled with sincerity. Anna felt a stab of pain and a glimmer of something bright at the same time. She hadn't been addressed with such concern by a man in a very long time. You're not at fault, she said, lowering her eyes. I know it's not that simple, but I can't deny that when we talk, I feel alive. Those last words spilled from her mouth emboldened her. She looked at him, and that moment felt infinitely long. His eyes met hers, and they both realized there was barely any distance left between them, physically or emotionally. James slowly, as if giving her time to pull back, reached out and touched her palm. Anna didn't recoil. On the contrary, she gripped his hand more tightly, feeling this gesture said more than any words. I don't understand why this happened, she whispered, but I don't want to think about it right now. It just feels so good in this moment, being near you. At that moment, James gently leaned in toward her. Anna saw his lips approach, and her chest clenched with anticipation. This was the instant two people recognized they were drawn to one another more powerfully than any fears or rules. The kiss was soft, tentative, filled with trembling and a vast amount of unspoken words. Anna felt as if her soul broke free from the shackles of colorless routine, as if something bright flared up inside her chest. Hope, passion, happiness, or perhaps all of that combined. She tasted the slight saltiness of tears, hers or his, she couldn't tell. Then she pulled back slightly to look into his eyes, which showed the same confusion and wonder. Anna, he exhaled as if her very name sounded like a prayer to him. Don't say anything, she whispered, knowing any word could shatter this fragile moment. They stood there, a few centimeters of breath separating them, and it felt as if the world outside her home had vanished. No more rain, no more years of marriage, no more pain and disappointment. Only her and the man who seemed to understand her better than anyone else. Minutes passed, and gradually reality returned. Somewhere a clock was ticking, an unsorted mail lay in the hallway, and the realization crept in that this wasn't just an innocent friendship. It was betrayal, toward her husband, toward her old life. But why did her heart beat in sync with the desire to continue? Sorry, James suddenly said, still holding onto her hand. I didn't mean to intrude on your life, but it happened. Anna squeezed his fingers. I guess I've been waiting for someone to intrude and show me I'm still alive, she answered, bitterness mingling with gratitude in her voice. I don't know what to do now. James lowered his head. His breathing grew uneven, but he seemed to be searching for the right words of support. I don't want you to suffer. I have no solution, but I'm here if you need me. Anna felt everything swirling into a single knot inside. Fear of being found out, pain for a marriage that had long ceased bringing her joy, and a sense of happiness that someone was holding her hand and not letting go. When he finally left, Anna couldn't calm down for a long time. The taste of his kiss lingered on her lips, and surges of guilt and euphoria clashed in her soul. She understood she had fallen into an emotional closeness she could no longer deny. That evening, she kept thinking, should she tell Daniel something, try for a serious conversation, or go on living in the shadows of this secret? But for now, Anna couldn't decide. She wanted to figure out why her life had become so empty, why she suddenly met a person who filled the void. That night she dozed off after tossing and turning, unsettled by dreams of their brief closeness in the kitchen, of her guilt before her husband. But the more she tried to justify herself, the more she realized there's no going back. She had already taken a step beyond the line where not everything is defined by right or wrong. Still, something real had appeared in her heart, albeit frightening in its inevitability. She fell asleep by morning, fleetingly noting that the rain outside had stopped and maybe the sun was already rising. Maybe it would bring her answers, or on the contrary, fresh doubts. Several days passed after Daniel left, and they felt like the longest in Anna's life. The house felt empty, though seemingly the usual household objects remained in place. The same photographs on the shelf, the same schedules of purchases and bills. But silence rang out, and Anna realized everything had irreversibly changed. Her heart ached with pain, and her head spun with questions. Had she done the right thing? Was there truly a chance to fix everything? For the first time in a long while, Anna resolved to do something she'd never considered. She made an appointment with a family therapist, even if by herself for now since her husband was gone. But she needed at least some clarity. She sat in the psychologist's office, speaking about her feelings, about a marriage that had long since ceased bringing joy, about how meeting James suddenly flipped her perspective. The therapist didn't offer direct solutions, but helped her ask the right questions. Gradually, Anna came to realize that her marriage had not collapsed in a single day, and that blame lay not on one side only. Meanwhile, the mailman still came to her neighborhood, but a couple of times when he knocked, Anna didn't dare open. Too many emotions were raging inside, and she feared that a single wrong word would break the fragile bond they had. She knew James was probably hurting too. He'd also gone through a divorce and had his share of scars. She didn't want to drag him further into her pain, but one day, when Anna did step out to retrieve the mail, they met on the path. James looked anxious, but tried to smile. "I'm glad you're okay," he said softly, as if unsure whether she wanted more conversation. Anna dropped her gaze. "Sorry I didn't open before. I needed time to figure things out." He showed no reproach or resentment, just understanding and a slight sadness. He nodded. "I didn't want to interfere. I was just worried in case you were alone with these problems." She answered a quiet thank you and brushed her hair aside, a gesture that revealed both embarrassment and gratitude. She wanted to hug him, but her fear of rekindling strong feelings prevailed. They simply stood side by side, unsure whether to allow themselves a touch now that everything was so complicated. The next day, Anna received a phone call from Daniel. His voice was tense, but free of accusations. He said he was ready to return to town, and if she didn't mind, he wanted to talk. She agreed. Although she hadn't fully made up her mind, she felt she owed him at least a proper conversation. They met in a city park. She sat on a bench waiting, and Daniel arrived a little late. He looked tired, as she did, worn out. But in his gaze, she sensed a sort of determination. They sat in silence for a while, watching passers-by strolling and children riding bicycles. The air smelled of freshly cut grass, oddly contrasting with their internal tension. "I realized I'm to blame for a lot," Daniel finally said, breaking the silence. "I got caught up in work, stopped seeing the woman I once built dreams with. I'm sorry." Anna looked at his hands, which he alternately clenched and unclenched, battling his own nerves. "I'm guilty too," she finally said. "I never said I was hurting. I didn't push for a conversation. I just withdrew. And in the end, I found what was missing, somewhere else." The word "somewhere else" sounded heavy, but Daniel only sighed. He ran a hand over his forehead, sitting up straighter. "I don't know if we can fix everything, but I want to try, if you want to too. I'm ready for couples therapy, for changes, Just give me a chance. Anna's heart twisted from the realization that, however guilty he was genuinely trying to fight for their marriage, and she herself had recently lamented his lack of attention. Yet now, as he asked her to come back, she somehow lacked certainty. The hurt was already done. Life, as she had observed, extended beyond their home's walls. They talked for a long time about old grievances, about how they lost touch. Daniel confessed that he too had begun visiting a psychologist, recognizing that his own complacency had led to their marriage's downfall. Anna listened, realizing there were indeed changes in him, but the question was whether it was too late. Weeks went by, and Anna tried to be honest with both men. She and Daniel began attending couples therapy, learning to speak again without attacks or silence. But at the same time, she couldn't shake her warm feelings for James. Sometimes in the evening, she'd catch herself imagining what life might look like with him, thinking of his calm smile, how he looked at her, understanding without words. One day, Anna herself called James and suggested they meet in that same park where she'd recently talked with her husband. He came, visibly anxious but trying to hold it together. They sat on a bench by the pond, the water shimmering in the sunlight, while a breeze sent gentle ripples across the surface. "How are you?" he asked, carefully extending a hand to touch her fingers, but at the last second pulled it back. "I'm in a complicated situation," Anna admitted. "Daniel's trying to fix things. I don't want to act rashly, but at the same time," her voice broke, "I don't know if I can keep living in the past." James looked at her with understanding. "I'm not demanding you choose," he said softly, though pain glinted in his eyes. "You deserve happiness. If you can rediscover it in your marriage, I'll be happy for you. If not, remember I'm here. But I don't want you to feel guilty." Tears rose in Anna's eyes. She had never felt so much sorrow and sweetness at once. Both her husband and this man wanted her well-being, and she didn't know where to go. Eventually, she decided to give therapy with Daniel a chance. It was not an easy path. They underwent a series of counseling sessions, recalling how they once fell in love, what they'd each expected from life. Daniel, it seemed, was trying to atone, becoming more attentive. He even suggested they visit an art exhibit together, reminding her she once loved to paint. But Anna noticed her heart no longer responded to his gestures the way it used to. She appreciated his efforts to fix what was broken, but felt they might have truly drifted apart. Still, they kept trying, like people who don't want to give up without a fight. James did not vanish entirely from Anna's life. He remained a friend, someone she could tell how tough it was to revive a failing marriage. However, they didn't get as close as they had that one evening. Between them lay honesty. "I'm trying to see if I can save my marriage," Anna would say, and James pressed his lips together, nodding but hiding his pain. Months passed. Anna realized that with Daniel they now communicated better, but the chemistry and passion of their younger years seemed irretrievably lost. The counseling helped dissolve aggression and emptiness, but she still felt their bond had turned more into an alliance of old friends than a husband and wife. Finally, she summoned the courage to tell her husband directly. He listened silently, a look of sadness etched on his face. Yet now that they spoke honestly, he acknowledged, "If you can't be happy with me, I don't want to hold you by force. I love you, but I also love you as a person who deserves joy." So they decided to separate amicably, free of big scandals or blame. They simply recognized their roads had parted. Daniel packed his things to move to a new apartment. Anna felt no euphoria, but saw no reason to keep a marriage that had lost its emotional core. When he left, Anna was alone in the house. That evening, James came by with flowers. He hadn't expected everything to resolve so swiftly, but seeing how tired she looked, he gently put an arm around her shoulders. This time, Anna didn't resist. She pressed her forehead against his chest, letting her tears flow. Tears of sorrow for the marriage that once promised happiness, and tears of relief that she no longer had to lie to herself. That evening, they talked for a long time about the future. Anna didn't rush into a new relationship, but felt a special bond with James. He promised to stay close without pushing her, and that alone gave her peace and a chance to move forward. Another few months passed, and life slowly reshaped itself. Anna returned to her old paintings, setting up a small corner in the living room as a mini studio. Daniel stopped by occasionally for the mail, now not as her husband but like an old friend. They'd learned to speak without bitterness or blame. James was no longer just the mailman. He'd become someone she could confide in about joys and sorrows. One evening when the sun was setting over their peaceful suburb, Anna stepped onto the porch, gazing at the crimson sunset. Behind her, the door softly creaked, and James came up to stand beside her, slipping an arm around her waist. She leaned into him, feeling the warmth of his presence. In her heart, there was no longer a raging storm. It wasn't all perfect yet, but she was learning to live for herself, not torn between duty and guilt. It wasn't a fairy tale happy ending, but a sincere, real path toward something new. Anna inhaled and smiled, watching the last rays of the sun dissolve in the sky. Many steps remained ahead, but now she knew for sure she had the right to happiness, and she alone would decide with whom and how to build her life.